And just like that, another test series is upon us. And look at this fabulous crew that I've got with me as we look ahead to it. England up against Pakistan. England managing to continue to ride this high after reclaiming the Wisden Trophy from the West Indies. Now they have another task ahead of them against Pakistan. George, let me just start off with you. Like I said, with that momentum coming from the West Indies series, with the form that we see certain people in, aka Stuart Broad, who's playing like an all-rounder, is it clear to say, or is it fair to say that they go in as favourites in this series?
I think that's fair. I think that having played a test series is a really substantial advantage. You know, Pakistan come into it without any professional warm-up time. You know, they haven't played a first-class game. And England have got that sort of perfect balance, really, between having played but having been able to rotate their bowlers. So I think that's a significant advantage. We know that Pakistan have a pretty decent record in England, but we also know that England haven't been beaten in England for quite a long time. So, yeah, I think it's fair to say that England are probably the favourites.
And then Oz, you're joining us as well. We've got to give you Pakistani boys some love, because as we were saying that even though England, as we just saw, are an absolute force to be reckoned with, but Pakistan is one of the few teams that actually has had success against England in England, despite English conditions. So what's going to be the key here? What can they learn from the West Indies if they're able to have a good series?
You know, I mean, I think the key is going to be what it always is with Pakistan, and that, you know, you can apply that pretty much anywhere they go, but especially England. I think if the key is that you get some runs on the board, because I think they have a bowling attack, you know, that's good enough. And probably I would say, I mean, it's inexperienced, but I think potentially it is a very good bowling attack that they have. And if they play, you know, one of the big questions before the test is whether they go with three pacers and one spinner, or whether they play, you know, one Yasir Shah and Shadab Khan, who's an all-rounder but can leg spin it as well. So I think, you know, if you get enough runs on the board, as always with Pakistan, then they're in with a shout. I think what they've got going for them as well is that they start test series in England quite well. I know, you know, they haven't played competitive cricket for a while, but a lot of the guys are used to that, frankly. Like every year, Pakistan's test calendar is literally a break between February and July when they don't do anything. That happens every year to guys like Azhar Ali and Asad Shafiq. You know, the pandemic has stopped them from playing test cricket, but hello, it's every year in Pakistani test cricket. So, you know, they will, of course, be a bit undercooked, but that hasn't in the past stopped them from still turning up for that first test, especially in England, and doing pretty well.
And George, just with what Oz said, of course, getting runs on the board, we know that it is literally easier said than done coming up against this England bowling attack. As we just saw, you know, how the West Indies batting really let them down, even though you were quite sympathetic in the sense that it's really hard to find an answer to come up against the likes of Stuart Broad when he's playing like he is, and Jimmy Anderson and the rest of the arsenal that England have. So would that be the key for you, to just get some runs on the board, and can Pakistan do it?
Oh, well, their batting looks quite attractive on paper. I would say that someone like Shan Masood could be a really key player. So the last time he came to England, he looked hopeless. They made mincemeat out of him. But he's worked really hard on his game, and he's one of the most improved players in the world. And actually, one of the guys he's worked with is the England coach, Gary Palmer. And I think if he can translate the form he's had elsewhere to English conditions and get Pakistan off to a good start, that batting lineup looks, you know, potentially really strong, but you've got to get through the new ball. So him, Abid Ali, they look like good players, but they are unproven in these conditions. So I think that's the key struggle for them, and I think that if they come through it, they have a really good chance of winning the series. I do think they're very, very dangerous.
And then Oz, what do you think as well there? Because we know with Pakistan, as sometimes is quite the case, is that they can bat straight down, and we can see some late fireworks. You know, whether you want to see as many fireworks that much down when you're trying to build a test innings, that's up for debate. But for you, who do you think is going to be key in this batting lineup?
Yeah, I think, you know, I'm with George there. Somebody like Shan Masood and Abid both actually at the top of the order. The key to Pakistan in England has always been their middle order. You know, they've scored the runs because the openers have been so bad. The average, I think, 25 is an opening partnership over the last decade, or maybe even longer, actually. So, you know, if Shan and Abid and then Azhar at 3, if they can see off the new ball with, you know, maybe you don't have that many runs on the board, but if you don't lose that many wickets in that early period, then you're allowing the likes of Babar and Asad Shafiq to kind of profit. And, you know, Babar is going to be a big player throughout the series. He has to be. Like, he's going to be the guy that Pakistan will look to score runs. And it's going to be his wicket that when it falls, that Pakistan will kind of worry that, you know, okay, they've got him. Now we've got to kind of show up. But I think the form that Shan has shown, the start that Abid has made to his career, and they want, you know, somebody like Asad Shafiq to really kind of do what he's not been doing for 2 years since Misbah and Yunus retired. You know, it's for him to kind of take that batting order by the neck and just say that, listen, I'm going to be the guy who's going to score the big runs and the important runs in this. So, you know, they need those guys to start firing. But I think they do have a fairly decent, I would say, if unproven, batting order there, and potentially one that can put on, you know, if they put on 350, then that gives their bowler something to bowl at for sure. But putting on 350, as the West Indies saw, Alexis, against Broad, against Anderson, against Archer, against Wokes, and then Stokes if he bowls, it's not a walk in the park.
No, it definitely is not. Putting on 150 is not a walk in the park, that's for sure. And I mean, quickly before we wrap, just George, let's start with you. Any battles that you're looking forward to seeing? Because I know there are quite a few there that get everyone excited.
Well, I think one of the key ones is going to be Archer v Anderson of Broad for that last place in the England side, because I am glad I'm not making that decision. So, but it's obviously a really good place to be, but it's tough, and I just wonder, it could be the sort of call that destabilises a dressing room if it's not handled properly. So that's a potential challenge. But I'm going to go back to the same thing, really. Anderson and Broad with the new ball against Shan Masood, Abid Ali, that is really, really tough. And the only other thing I'd say is I kind of hope Pakistan don't play two spinners. I think that their extra seamer, if they played, I don't know, might they play the all-rounder, Fahim?
No, they haven't got him in the squad. They just announced the squad a little while ago. So
okay.
Squad, so he's not there. So it looks like they're probably going to go ahead with that two-leg spinner.
Okay. I think that's a shame, mainly because I think it puts too much pressure on the seamers. And so often we've seen sides try and do that, and they just... West Indies just wore out. They're fantastically hard-working and talented pace attack, and they played them in every game, and they looked exhausted. So I just wonder if they've missed a trick there. You know, in English conditions, someone like Fahim, you only really need to bowl good areas, hit the seam, and you're in with a chance. And he would have done that, and he can bat as well, of course. So that worries me a bit, because you're potentially asking young, very talented, but young bowlers to bowl a few too many overs. And, you know, these are 3 back-to-back tests again. And we saw exactly what happened. I would have thought that Misbah would have looked at the previous series with West Indies and learned lessons from that. And not wanted to put too much pressure on his bowlers. So you're asking an awful lot from spinners. And remember, Don Best didn't bowl a ball in the last test at Old Trafford.
Oz, do you share that worry?
A little bit. I would think that, you know, Pakistan have done this in the past, and they paid for it, actually, in a couple of tests in 2016. They do rely on Yasser to kind of take up the bulk of that, you know, giving the rest to the fast bowlers. He's there as a stock and shock bowler. But... You know, I'm a big fan of Fahim Ashraf. I think they should have persisted with him. The last time they were here in 2018, him and Shadab, actually 2 all-rounders, were really crucial throughout that series. And Fahim, like George said, he's actually a good bowler, and he took some good wickets. He didn't take many, but he took some good wickets. And for the first time ever, and that was Mickey Arthur's plan, the previous coach, his plan was that he would use Fahim as an all-rounder in places like Australia and South Africa and England. And he would use Shadab as the all-rounder in places like the UAE, back home in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. So he had that kind of option to make that 4-man attack a little bit bigger. But they haven't done that. They haven't really developed Fahim, even though his test record is pretty good. And it's disappointing that he's not even in the 16-man squad for this first test. And, you know, I personally would have had him and Shadab, or maybe just him in the side with the pace attack. But they haven't gone that way. I would think that Yasser will take a big load of the bowling. And Shadab will be in there as kind of almost a surprise package now. He's a better batsman than he was last time, and he did pretty well last time. But I would think that he would be there as a bit of a surprise package on the bowling front. And they would hope that Naseem, Shaheen, and Abbas are good enough to kind of, you know, get England into trouble early on. Especially I think what they're targeting is that top order of England. If they can make inroads early, then I think they're banking on the fact that they wouldn't need another Fahim to kind of give a rest to the bowlers.
You see, that goes to the heart of the problem that Pakistan, and not just Pakistan, but if you have a Fahim in the side regularly, you've possibly got a situation where someone like Mohammed Amir was prepared to bowl, playing more tests, because they're not worn out in quite the same way. I don't know, look, England went to number 1 in the world rankings, played a 3-man seam attack, but they had Graham Swan. And actually, it didn't last very long. Graham Swan's elbow went, then Tim Bresden's elbow went. And
2 years in all, really, wasn't it, I guess?
Yeah, it was really, and which is a terribly brief period in the grand scheme of things. And Broad and Anderson go on, but they're not really typical, are they? They're kind of freaks. So I don't know. I just worry that it asks a lot of Shah, who's young, and you can't. And Abbas has suffered from over bowling in the past as well.
Yeah, 100%. He's got a shoulder that hasn't allowed him to be as effective before the injury as he has been after it. So
and it was
a good call.
So the key moments in that, West Indies really nearly retained that trophy. I mean, they were an hour away on the 4th afternoon of the second test, and England was something like 4 down for 120 in the final test. Look at Alexis. And the key thing was the bowlers got a little bit weary, and Pope and Butler escaped, and then Broad was able to thrash a quick 50. And that was the key thing, that bowling just became a little worn out, and Holder didn't really have anywhere to turn. And that's all that worries me. I think this Pakistan side on paper looks really, really good. It's just a little bit unproven in English conditions. And in England, consistency, discipline are so important for batting and bowling. That those sort of talents, they're more important than flair, really.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube, and for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app, and for premium content plus live streaming, make sure to subscribe to ESPN Player.